Hi, this is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. And today, we're going to be talking about releasing music and how to get it heard by actual people. This is one of my other favorite topics to talk about. We talk a lot on this podcast about compression and EQing and mixing and mastering and recording and all that stuff. But what good is all of this stuff that we're doing around music and music production if no one ever hears it? Now, granted, music is rewarding in its own right, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But chances are, if you are making music, you actually want people to hear it and to enjoy it. And particularly today, in the 21st century, in the current year, there are better and worse ways to get your music heard by actual people. And I want to talk a little bit about release strategies that are going to help with that. And in particular, the theme of today's episode is going to be the strategy of releasing a song a month for a year. That's not too daunting of a task for you. Releasing one song every month for a year, that's 12 songs, the length of an album. But it's a totally different way of releasing an album that I think is much better suited for releasing music right now and getting people to hear it in 2022 or whenever you're listening to this. I bet you that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, this is going to be a much better approach than the approach your mind might be stuck in that's more of an approach for the 1960s and the 1970s. Once we get talking about this, it'll segue into a couple of other strategies that are kind of refinements on this idea, but I want you to really wrap your head around this, why it works better than what you might otherwise be inclined to do, and what are some alternative approaches you can take if this strategy isn't enough for you or is too much for you. So we'll go into some alterations on it, and I'll give you some case studies that you can look into that shows that this approach really does work. Before we get into all that and a whole lot more, the only thing I've got to do, because this is a podcast, is give a shout out to our sponsors. And our biggest, most important sponsor, as always, is you. How do you sponsor this podcast? If you're on the YouTube version, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Consider leaving a comment down there. We really love to hear from you. How did you put out your last release? How are you thinking about putting out your upcoming release? But if you want to sponsor this podcast, the best way to sponsor it is by sponsoring yourself. Check out one of our great full-length courses like Compression Breakthroughs, where you'll finally learn to hear and understand and use compression with extreme confidence and extreme success. Also, if you want a whole system for mixing that's going to dramatically improve your results, making your time to complete each mix go way down while your quality and creativity goes way up, you're absolutely going to love Mixing Breakthroughs. Check that out over at mixingbreakthroughs.com. Or if you want to learn everything that I know about mastering, check that out at masteringdemystified.com. All of these courses come with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Last quick shout out before we get into the meat of today's episode is for our brand sponsors, Soundtoys, sponsoring this podcast from the beginning, making some of my favorite creative mixing effects in the known universe. Try out anything they make for free for 30 days over at soundtoys.com. Also, iZotope, makers of some of my other favorite plugins that I use, at least some of them, on practically every single master that I do. You can get 10% off anything they make over at iZotope.com/SonicScoop. That's iZotope.com/SonicScoop. Or that very same link, get a 30-day free trial to their Music Production Suite Pro Bundle instead of the normal 7-day free trial. Last, not least, Focusrite, making some of the best bang for the buck and value in interfaces from their entry-level Scarlett series all the way up to their high-end RedNet series. I'm talking into a Focusrite Claret interface right now. Hasn't given me a lick of trouble. Absolutely tremendous value and feature set. Check them out over at Focusrite.com. All right, let's get right into the meat of today's episode. One song a month for a year. You can totally do this, but why? The why, I've talked about this in the podcast before, is that so many people take an approach releasing music that is better suited for the 1970s, the 1980s, maybe even as late as the 1990s, where they go spend months on creating an album. They go to a studio, or maybe they're doing it in a home studio, and they create this one big project. They make their magnum opus, everything they have to say to the world at once, and then they have these 10 to 12 to 14 songs just sitting there ready to escape into the world. So they go out and they release that music, and then they're like, now what? How do I get people to listen to this? I don't actually have a fan base. I don't have a big social media following to release it into. what was the point of all of that? I mean, it was artistically fulfilling for me, but I wanted people to hear this, and it's just crickets. And now this thing is already released, and I'm going to try to go out after it's been released to music blogs or to people who curate playlists and say, hey, can you put this on your blog or your playlist? And it's like, well, that kind of came out a month ago. Why didn't you contact me before it came out? And the answer is generally because I didn't think of it, and I have no idea what I'm doing, and I have no idea how to get people to hear this. And you got to recognize that that's a skill in and of itself, getting people to hear your music. It is important that your music is good and that your mixes are inspiring and don't get in the way of the music and that your master sounds good. All of that stuff is important. But how important is it really if no one ever hears it? Now, if you don't care about no one ever hearing your music, not a big deal. Maybe this podcast episode isn't for you because it's about getting people to hear your music. Maybe you're satisfied just with having this project that you did that only your closest friends and family members ever hear, and it's just this thing you created for your own sanity, and that's okay. That's an absolutely beautiful role for music to play in your life. And if that's all you want out of the music that you're doing, for it to be a project that satisfies you and keeps your sanity and maybe is a fun thing to do with your friends and is a much better thing for you to do than drinking heavily every night, you've got it. Done. Music. Awesome. But there's a good chance that you want some people to hear it. That you think that your music is so good that if other people heard it, like it would put a smile on their face or they would connect with it or it would make the hair stand up in the back of their neck, that there's some power in there that you want to share with other people. And if you feel that your music has that potential power, then at least considering how to get other people to hear it is worthwhile, even if you're not successful in that. Because a cool thing is if you lose at the game of getting other people to hear and interact with your music, you are going to learn so many lessons from that that can serve you elsewhere in life. You're in some kind of business right now, whatever it is. I don't care if you're actually selling things online or if you're a school teacher. You're in some type of business where getting attention for what you are able to do and what you're able to provide to others is important. Whether you're selling a product directly or you're just selling yourself as an employee. And so many of the principles that apply to getting your music noticed apply to getting you noticed in any other capacity in your life. And if you're even marginally successful in getting your music noticed, really those skills do translate potentially to other areas of your life. So at the very least, it's worth thinking about and trying if you've never done it before. All right, so let's get into this, what I think is a much better strategy. This, instead of doing a whole bunch of songs at once and releasing them all at once, you basically allow yourself the opportunity to potentially touch an audience again and again and again and again. Not just one time, but twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and so on. And if you're doing the strategy really well, it's about more than just releasing one song per month. It's about doing other things around that one song per month that give you the ability to touch those potential audiences again and again, because you really need to touch people multiple times before they will never forget you. And that is true in every walk of life and not just in music. It's an essential component of marketing. Whether that's marketing a product that you're selling, marketing yourself as a romantic partner, marketing yourself as an employee for a job. Yes, first impression, big, but also getting to the place where you have a chance of making that first impression and then making additional good impressions along the way that help people connect to you, know who you are, know what you're about, and know what it is that you can provide them. Now, there is an in-between strategy here. You could take the approach of, we're going to release a single, and then we're going to release another single, and then we're going to release an EP, and then we're going to turn that EP into an album. And there you've got these 4 potential touches. And on the 4th touch, you have your magnum opus that you're really hoping people enjoy, this great collection of songs that you've done. But in today's short attention span world, I really think that the approach of coming back again and again and again, one time every month at minimum, is going to help you out dramatically compared to just having 4 potential touches in a year. Because if you release a full-length album out there into the world with no audience, there's no one there to care, to hear it, to enjoy it. If you've done one better by releasing a single, getting some people primed, having some credibility and some reason for some people to pay attention to you, that's better. But what you've really got to do today is build a fan base over time, build a potential audience over time. Keep contributing to the stream of experiences, both virtual and in person, that people have access to. So if you want to turn music into a way of life and potentially even a living, this is the way that you've got to start thinking. Now, if you were to take this strategy, you absolutely could still record a whole collection of songs at once, at one time, and then have this collection and then just kind of put it out bit by bit, one at a time, over a span. That's absolutely one way that you could do things. But I've got to say, today you can really grow and evolve in front of people and have that be not just okay, but welcome and awesome. And if you look at some of your favorite artists today, they've probably left behind a trail of them early on in their career all the way up to today. And you can see them refine their craft as they go along. And some of the biggest creators out there who integrate social media into what they're doing, you should do this exercise of really going into a deep dive of their earliest releases, their earliest splashes out there into the world. And yes, some of them might have done really well, but chances are that they have refined what they are doing dramatically. And so can you over time. Because if you right now in your beginning stages spend so much time all at once on these 12 songs, you're doing them all at the level that you are at right now. You don't have this ability to evolve from releasing 1, 2, 3 songs and then get better at it. And then have another season where you release 1, 2, 3 songs, and you've made improvements since last season. And then you have another season where you release 1, 2, 3 songs, and you've improved again. And by the end of the year, if you're doing songs in batches of 1, 2, or 3, your productions at the end of that year are probably going to be so much more inspiring, so much more impressive, so much more memorable and well executed than your earliest productions at the beginning of that same year. So with this approach of releasing 1 song per month, you get to take advantage of not only being able to touch a potential audience again and again to help them remember you and to help them engage with you, but also to make every single time you touch them better executed, more inspiring, more worthy to connect with, more likely to raise the goosebumps on the back of their neck. Or wherever you get goosebumps. Where do you get your goosebumps? Let me know in the comments down below. Man, for me, it's like right here, back of the neck. It just stands up on end when music to me is electrifying. There's really no other way to describe it. But that's not the only benefit. Another one of these benefits is you get to get better not only at music production, but at music releasing. That you get to learn what are the most effective ways to get my message out there. What are the most effective ways for me to get written about in blogs, in online magazines, to get placed in playlists, to get noticed by other influencers, to have other people share my music? What are the most effective strategies to get other people in my corner helping to spread my message? And you get to get better at that every month, not just at writing songs and producing them and recording them and mixing them. You get to get better at releasing music. So if you put out your first song and very few people will hear it and you have a lot of trouble getting traction, you just take that all as a lesson for song number 2 and then for song number 3 and so on. And you just allow yourself to build up steam as you go along. Now, if you really want people to remember you, even this isn't enough. If you took a strategy of releasing one song per week for a year, imagine your potential ability to connect with fans. Imagine how many chances you would have to get better at your craft and better at reaching people. But there's a reality here. If you're going to release a song every week, 52 or let's say 50 songs a year, you take 2 weeks off for vacation from music. If you were to do that many, they're probably not going to be the same kinds of fully realized productions that you think about when you think about a quote unquote album. And that is okay. If you were to release a song every single week, then all of a sudden you have to start thinking differently about what it means to release a song. If you were going to put out a piece of content every week, what would you do? Would you take one of the songs that you had previously released and then just do a single instrument and voice rendition of it? Would you cover someone else's song? Would you do a fast, ad hoc, impromptu collaboration with another artist where you can cross-pollinate audiences and share audiences with one another? What would you have to do differently if you stopped thinking about the album as the thing? Because, spoiler alert, right now, the album is not the thing. The content creator and their stream of ongoing content and the ongoing ability to have musical experiences with that artist again and again, that's the thing, not the album. The album is just one small part of that. I'd like to give you one good case study as an example. A friend and client of mine, a guy named Joshua Lee Turner, had him on this channel for a whole hour-long conversation about exactly this topic. And he has been doing YouTube videos since he was a teenager. And basically, he's been doing mostly covers for much of that time. But his ability to come out with a cover again and again and again, practically every week, has taught him so much about songwriting. Because he has had to learn to play some of his favorite songs in history and get a sense from the inside out what makes them tick, exploring the work of other, even more accomplished, even more magnetic writers and performers, and just glean insights into how to write his own songs by exploring other people's songs. Because honestly, copying, that idea of copying, it is something that pretty much all of your favorite artists did at one point in their career. I mean, the Beatles started out playing covers. Nirvana, Kurt Cobain, you might not know, is in a Creedence Clearwater Revival cover band before Nirvana. This act of copying, paying homage to, that's a big thing. But also, so many of your favorite artists have collaborated with other artists. Back in the day, decades ago, those collaborations might have happened very frequently just in the form of playing tours, playing concerts where you had the headlining artists and opening artists. And those opening artists got some of the audience from those headlining audiences, and to some degree, vice versa. But there was that ability by sharing bills to kind of cross-pollinate audiences. And that does still happen in live concerts today, but there are also ways to do that as part of your media release strategy, of making collaboration part of that strategy. Hip-hop artists and EDM artists do this particularly well. And there's so many of us that could learn from that kind of approach. And this is something that Josh Turner has done on his channel. He's done a lot of collaborations with other artists who have their own channels. And all of this, the studying the work and performing live the work of other great artists and collaborating with other great artists, all of this went into him finally creating his own full-length releases of his own original songs. And when he went out and put them out there, there was actually a built-in audience who was curious to hear what a full-length album of original music from Josh was going to sound like. And you could be in a similar place. There are so many examples of people doing this well. Another friend of mine, Scott Bradley, does great stuff on the Postmodern Jukebox channel. And he has been doing for years now really interesting arrangements, renditions, recreations of popular songs in the styles that he really loves. A lot of these being kind of old school styles of jazz and R&B and big band and the like. And he's brought that project on tour and been extremely successful there. And YouTube in particular, it really does, to a certain degree, favor this covers approach, but it's not the only approach. Some of the most interesting music producers and musicians out there are really about inviting people into their process. Two really big names that you can study would be Andrew Huang. I hope I'm saying his name right. I met him at one NAMM show. Delightful guy to hang out with. He's got some channel with millions of subscribers on it. And he really invites people into his music production process with really high production values. But he didn't start out with the same exact production values he has today. They've evolved over time. He started out really good, but has increasingly upped the ante and can get millions of views, often on original creations he's making. And a big part of it is inviting people into the process. Another person who invites people into the process in his own way is Jacob Collier. Absolutely amazing musician and incredibly intelligent guy, particularly from music theory perspective. He's a real proponent of just tempered music, getting away from the equal temperament that we're used to on the piano. And he writes some really beautiful, really interesting harmonies that are extremely unusual and extremely distinctive. And I've got to tell you, him as a musician and artist, I almost like hearing him talk about music more than I like listening to his music. Although his music is very good, he's just an amazing person to kind of share the excitement about the craft of music. Just his ability to talk about the ideas behind music is absolutely infectious, especially to someone else who also has a musical mind. Now, these are just some particularly notable and successful people. But even if you never plan on getting to that level, taking some of those ideas and bringing them into your own work and your own release strategy is essential. You can think about getting multiple touches per year, per month, per week, potentially even. How do you keep on coming back and engaging fans? Are you only putting out your own original music? Are you too proud to ever say there's been other amazing musicians out there who write songs that I value so much? How can I reinterpret and rearrange these things? Because that's honestly an easier way to find an audience. And there's so many ways to express your unique take on music through music that was written before by other people. I mean, this is how music happened for most of the history of music, of taking themes and sometimes full songs and compositions that already existed and presenting them in your own way. We only really started to lose that, I think, artificially beginning in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. And I think that that's a little bit of an artifact of the very peculiar set of circumstances that were going on in the late 20th century. And now I think we're getting back to something that really resembles the way people have worked on music throughout most of history. Do you also have ways of collaborating with other artists and finding ways to cross-pollinate audiences and help each other grow your fan bases? And do you have ways to invite fans and potential fans into your process and into your way of thinking about music? Of course, there's so many other things you can do. I mean, to some artists, fashion or the visual aspect or creating beautiful music videos is an important part of what they do. And there's so much more we can consider. But for right now, I hope that this episode helps you reframe your thinking, and hopefully it will help finally break you out of this late 20th century mold of releasing music, of creating your whole magnum opus at once and putting it out there and hoping that people hear it. Guess what? You do not have a major record label machine behind you, most likely, to help you promote this stuff and get it out into all of the right magazines and onto the MTVs and start touring with that's a different world from a different time for different people who are not you, and many of whom have careers that are over, or they're not even alive anymore, some of these people. You've got to think about what makes sense and what works today. And what makes sense and what works today is actually pretty similar to what made sense and what worked a long time ago? Well, let me know in the comments down below. Let's get a conversation going. How did you release your last project? Or how do you plan on releasing your upcoming project? Is there anything from today's episode that made you rethink your strategy? Do you have some ideas about how you could better get your stuff out there? Please let us know in the comments down below. Love to hear from you. I read every single one of them and respond when I can. If you prefer to write to me, you always can at podcast@sonicscoop.com. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider giving it a like or giving us a rating and review on one of the podcast services. Also, I want to give you some discounts and some free stuff, so let me tell you about that. But first, if you really want to sponsor this podcast, the best way you can do it is sponsor yourself. Check out one of our great full-length courses like Compression Breakthroughs, Mixing Breakthroughs, or Mastering Demystified. And you can get bundles of any two or all three of these courses for some great discounts. So check them out: Compression Breakthroughs, Mixing Breakthroughs, and Mastering Demystified if you really want to level up your game on the production side of things. And if you want some cool, fun new toys to play with, check out iZotope over at iZotope.com/SonicScoop. That's iZotope.com/SonicScoop, where you can get anything they make for 10% off, or get a 30-day free trial instead of the usual 7-day free trial on their Music Production Suite Pro bundle. Thanks also to Focusrite for supplying this lovely claret interface for me to use on the podcast. They make some of the best values and interfaces out there, from their entry-level Scarlett series all the way up to their high-end RedNet series. Their interfaces are among the most popular in the world, and for good reason. Also, last, a quick shout out to Soundtoys, making some of my favorite creative mixing effects in the known universe. Every single one of them, a ton of fun to play with. Check them out over at soundtoys.com, where you can try out anything they make for free for 30 days. Thanks for hanging out with me for this week's episode of the Sonic Scoop podcast. This has been Justin Colletti of Sonic Scoop. See you next time.